Hey guys, Al Bigley here, and even though I'm a big fan of Marvel comics mostly, I did grow up reading the Superman and Batman comics of the day. Ended up being a bigger Batman fan than Superman, but recently, over the past several years, I've been collecting a lot of 60s Superman titles like Action, Superman, even Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. For one reason, they're abundant, they're cheap. You can get these for like $3 or $4 if you look hard enough in the bargain boxes at conventions. Yes, I know most of these stories were written for 8-year-old boys to keep them entertained during a car trip to Grandma's house, and they're not really meant to look at with adult eyes. But some really deserve mention, much like the story in this issue of Superman, which just happens to be from the exact time I first appeared in the world, May 1965. It's a backup story called Tales of Kryptonite, the fourth in a series that was being done then. There have been a few Tales of Kryptonite before this. One of the oddest and most ludicrous ideas here is that the Kryptonite piece actually narrating the story seems to be sentient. It even has something of a face, and I guess it has the powers to either speak or communicate with us telepathically somehow. Of course, as we all know, Kryptonite had been a long-running feature in the Superman books, actually created for the Superman radio show by writers that were frustrated coming up with any real physical threat to the Man of Steel. Even today, it's hard to think about Superman without thinking about Kryptonite, a piece of his own planet that was made radioactive by the very explosion of said planet. We're told in the very third panel of this story that somehow this piece of normal green Kryptonite turned red by being plummeted into space by Superman himself and encountering a red cloud. Now, how exactly that's possible? Was that a red Kryptonite cloud? We don't know, but there it is. But wait, we're not done yet. Thanks to an orbiting satellite that has an atomic battery malfunction that sends out a beam that just happens to strike in Superman's Fortress of Solitude, this tiny chunk of now gold Kryptonite. How exactly this is possible is unknown. Again, we have to accept that these things aren't changing the outer color of these pieces of rock. They're giving them totally new properties. If you remember, green Kryptonite simply weakens and sickens Superman, resulting in his possible death. Red Kryptonite plays a temporary trick on Superman every time, resulting in usually a physical change. He turns into an ant, has memory loss, can't fly any longer, has amnesia. Gold Kryptonite, we're told, is the worst because, of course, it permanently and quickly robs any Kryptonian of their superpowers. Wait, it gets better. Within close proximity of this very chunk of Kryptonite, there stands, in Superman's Fortress of Solitude, the Bottle City of Kandor, shrunken before the death of Krypton by the evil Brainiac, one of Superman's famous enemies from space. Superman later recovered this chunk of his hometown and kept it in his fortress, always pledging to enlarge it, but always failing in that task. Yes, I know there's a later 70s story that finally sees the enlargement of Kandor and its many once tiny inhabitants. And back to our story. But the dutiful denizens of Kandor, they actually see what's happened here. And they see Superman is about to arrive, and that newly made gold piece of Kryptonite could rob the Man of Steel of his powers the minute he enters his fortress. Boy, they must have monitors everywhere. The tiny Kandorians soon rush to a pretty cool invention, an all-lead outer suit, much like Iron Man's, that allows him to function while being protected by any type of radiation outside of the Bottle City. I always wonder why Superman didn't use this more anytime he knowingly had to handle Kryptonite. I know he did in a few other 60s stories. This suit, if you notice, it even predates the movie Iron Man having outside monitors that pretty much bring him information inside the suit via a display screen across the facial shell inside. Very forward-thinking. Well, the tiny Kandorians make themselves larger and larger, still tiny, in order to exit properly the upper cork of the Bottled City of Kandor. Soon they latch on to a phantom zone ray projector that I guess happens to also be lying right out in the open near that piece of now gold Kryptonite, with the idea of plunging that piece of gold Kryptonite out of the fortress and into the phantom zone. But as luck would have it, one of the Kryptonian beasts that Superman keeps in his fortress zoo is loose, and he tears through one of the tiny Kandorians' outer lead suits, thus exposing them, being from Krypton, remember, originally, to the power-stealing gold kryptonite. You see, when Kandorians do venture out of the bottle, they cannot enlarge themselves to full size, but they do have superpowers under the yellow sun that gives Superman, a fellow Kandorian, superpowers. Now, as you saw earlier, the Kandorians do enlarge themselves. They have that ability to better deal with the outer cork opening of the red sun-dominated Bottled City. Why they can't enlarge themselves further, we never delve into that. Now, Superman, when he shrinks to visit his Kandorian brothers and sisters, he also, upon exiting, can retain full size once again. Why this is not applied to the tiny Kandorians is never addressed. Finally, we see the tiny Kandorian duo succeeding in launching that piece of gold K into the Phantom Zone just in time for Superman to arrive, completely oblivious to what has just occurred. The two soon decide to not tell Superman about their sacrifice because it would only make that big lunk feel bad about their courageous act. For some strange reason, these two Kandorians, Jay-Ree and his mate, decide to forever swear off Kandor, with the strange notion that if they go back and have children, their children will inherit their new handicap of not being able to attain superpowers outside of the bottle in the yellow sun. So basically they feel like if they procreate and pass on this particular handicap, so to speak, that eventually after several generations, all Kandorians will lose the ability to acquire superpowers outside of the bottle. Now, how that's possible, this is not something changing their very genetic structure or their DNA, is completely baffling. They soon decide not just to leave Kandor, but to sneak into Jimmy Olsen's pocket and live in our world. Now, keep in mind, they no longer have any superpowers. Even though they have monitors in Kandor, do they know about our world? Isn't it much safer to stay in the fortress, which is secluded and protected by certainly all these monitors we've witnessed? But no, they go back with Jimmy Olsen hiding in his pocket. Now, what if these tiny creatures had fallen off and out of Jimmy's pocket in the many, many miles long journey from the Arctic wastelands back to Metropolis? Well, we don't address that either. Again, they have no superpowers. Upon returning, Jimmy soon discovers the stowaways. What does he do? He runs to make a little dollhouse for them with his handy tools, complete with little name tags above the doorways. Somehow that Kryptonite rock, remember the sentient thinking piece of Kryptonite, is seeing this and relating it to us from the Phantom Zone. Yes, it's been established the creatures in the Phantom Zone, if they so decide, can see anything they want around the world, maybe even the universe. They're not bound by physical limitations. But still, no one is advising them on better options than living in a dollhouse in Jimmy Olsen's world. Well, wacky hijinks soon ensue. These two former super people decide to help Jimmy out during one of his many famous puppet shows, where he uses marionettes to entertain the kids of his Jimmy Olsen fan club. Now remember, the Kryptonite rock from the Phantom Zone is now relating to us the events that are happening in Jimmy's apartment, where Jimmy just happens to have a certain Superman souvenir standing by that seems to be a direct video link inside the cell of hated Superman super foe Lex Luthor himself. Boy, these guys really loved their monitors back then. Talk about Big Brother now. This is 1965. What about issues of basic personal privacy? But they're rigged for sound and they realize that Lex Luthor is up to his usual evilness. And these two former super people have to call Superdog to help them get into Lex Luthor's cell and thwart his latest diabolical scheme. They go on to do things like help save Clark Kent from Lois discovering his super identity one more time. And soon Superman learns about the duo's sacrifice when he has to come in for a last-minute rescue, where they reveal all they've done for him. No, Superman does not express any type of concern over what I guess would be the first Kandorians, remember, tiny-sized, living in our world with all its dangers that they may or may not be aware of. In fact, Superman soon learns that these two lovers want to be married, and being 1965, living in Jimmy Olsen's makeshift dollhouse or not, they better be married instead of, shacking up. So everybody, Superman, Lois, Jimmy, they all prepare for the wedding of the Kandorian duo. A quick ceremony is performed. And I don't think we're ever told what happens. I guess they now live with Clark Kent, this new young tiny married couple, in Clark Kent's own apartment. Does that now mean he has two tiny civilizations to deal with? Bottle City of Kandor at his fortress, and the well-being of these two former Kandorians in his own apartment? Is this ever mentioned again? And can Clark trust the duo with his secret identity and other secrets? But we're not done yet. The piece of gold kryptonite relates that in some strange way he's become a guardian of the exit and entrance of the Phantom Zone, keeping out dangerous enemies from ever leaving due to his ability to steal permanently the powers of any Kryptonians on Earth. In the Phantom Zone, we're made to understand there is no physicality. Everything is ghost-like and ethereal. How he retains this power is not explained. And can't the criminals, seeing an opening, simply leap over him into our world where things like a real kryptonite rock could exert real physical effects over them? That's never explained. The rock should have no power in the Phantom Zone. Can't these ghostly people step around it? Over it? It would be different again if it was waiting for them on our physical earthly side. Yes, folks, this is just one example of the strangeness of some of these stories. Again, they're not meant to stand up to adult scrutiny. They're not meant to stand up to comic readers concerned with continuity, what happened 2 years ago, what's going to happen 5 years from now. They were meant for kids to have fun with. Big, wonderful, silly fun. But it is fun sometimes for us, way down the pike, to take a look back, look at them and laugh and wonder. I've always said the Superman family of this time, this expanded family with the super dog and super horse, Kandor, Tales of the Past, time travel, the Legion of Superheroes in the future. It's like looking at Wizard of Oz, and once you understand that world, and you know about the Tin Men and the Lollipop Guild and the Good Witch and the Bad Witch, you can go off into all these different directions, looking at the past of the kingdom, or the secret origins of the Lollipop Guild, or where Glenda came from and her relatives and her world. That's what this stuff was. You can only tell so many stories of a guy standing and bouncing bullets off his chest, especially after 30 years of his existence, without having to mine some other territory. Especially when, during this time, you had so much content that needed to be provided. 3 stories in each issue of Superman, Action, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Superboy, the Legion of Superheroes, all these books still selling then at astronomical levels. Even something like Lois Lane was selling near 1 million copies a month during this time, and this is the mid-60s. So, please don't think I'm making fun of this stuff. It's just fun to look at it and really scratch your head and kind of poke and prod. So yes, I really like these stories. The one I just examined was drawn by Al Plastino, whose work I've always admired. He went on later to draw some of the Batman comic strip just a few years after this in the late 60s. And like I said, dig some of these up if you're not worried about realistic dialogue or settings or continuity, and just have fun with them. They're cheap, easy to get. So much of this stuff has also been reprinted. DC's lower price showcase volumes. Check out your local Ollie's store. Amazon has this stuff. Just a lot of fun. What comics were really meant to be when you get right down to it. These were never meant to be things that get argued about by 50 and 60 something men on Facebook. They are, but they were never meant for that. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Till next time, may all your kryptonite not turn gold.